having lunch a few weeks ago with a friend of mine, and she brought out that old saying of you should be able to do whatever you want as long as it's not harming anyone else. And I want to touch on that because I have heard that from so many different people in so many different places as a way to just effectively shut down any discussion of like, you know what? He's not hurting anybody, so leave it alone. And I kind of, I guess I would say I disagree with it, but I think the issue is more that just I think that is such an oversimplification of how we run things in this country or really any country. The first thing I just want to touch upon is that we do harm people. Like as a government, our entire judicial system harms people. And by and large, we as a society tend to see that as okay. I mean, I know there's some disagreement about should the death penalty be legal. I think most people would agree that self-defense in some form is legal. I think there's some disagreement about it at what point it's okay and to what extent, but we do see a lot of support for people who hurt someone in an attempt to defend their property, for example. And then even beyond physical violence, if you just look at the judicial system, there's plenty of evidence to indicate that locking people up is bad for their physical health, bad for their mental health, bad for their future prospects in this world, that it is harmful to the person. And I think some people would see that as like, okay, well, that's appropriate. That's a form of punishment. And I think even a lot of people who wouldn't say, oh, it's cool to hurt people that hurt other people or whatever, there's still this idea of sometimes we need to have these systems in place of doing this harm to a particular person because the net value to society is worthwhile. And the larger point here is that I think we are sometimes harming people in defense of a value that is not directly related to harm. One example I gave earlier was using self-defense to defend your property. Something that we value in our society is personal property. If you were to break into my house, like right now, if you were to break into my house and sit down in my living room and start eating Cheetos, well, you know what? I'm in another room, I'm filming a video, you're not bothering me. Like you could technically say, that person's not harming me, but you still don't do that. You don't break into another person's house. You don't treat it as your own because we value privacy and personal property. Another thing, for example, is let's say I had $50,000 in my bank account and then someone came and stole $1,000 from me. I think you can make the argument there of like, oh, well, she wasn't even harmed. She has so much more money. That's just like a drop in the bucket. But the point still is you don't take someone else's money. There's just certain values in our society that we uphold, not stealing something from other people, respecting other people's property, respecting their privacy. There's just, harm is not the be all and end all. There are other things, and in some cases we will even inflict harm in order to preserve those other values. Now at this point I do want to touch upon Jonathan Haidt and his work called The Righteous Mind, because I suspect some of the viewers have heard of it. This was a book written in 2012, and it was about 5 pillars of morality. There's the care pillar, there is fairness, loyalty, authority, and sanctity. I don't want to delve into this too much because I think Haidt's premise, I've seen some criticism of his premise. His premise was that liberals focused mainly on the care pillar and conservatives were more concerned with all 5 pillars. I have seen criticism indicating that that is sort of cherry picking and being overly simplistic. I think, for instance, if after the COVID lockdowns, if you look at liberals and conservatives and say conservatives are the people that respect authority, like, you need to do a little more critical thinking. I mean, there are other examples I could give, like when it comes to environmental integrity, I think liberals tend to be more into preserving the environment, and that would be an example of sanctity. But the larger point I'm getting at is that harm is a value. It is not the only value, and making sure that people do not get hurt is not the only value. And then the final thing I just want to touch upon is how subjective the idea of harm even is. When you look at some of the laws that are either put in place or that certain people want to put in place, it is not always explicitly to prevent harm. It is sometimes to prevent the possibility of harm. Let me give you one example. If you were to hurt someone, like if you were to shoot someone, we all agree that was wrong because you harmed them and you should be punished. Where we start to see this dissent and disagreement is the idea of gun control, that if you have a weapon, there is the high potential that you could use it for harm. And well, I think the word high you can even argue about. Like, you know, if you have it secured responsibly and you use it responsibly, how likely is that potential? Underlying theme here is there are people that want to legislate the possession of guns based on reducing the potential for harm as opposed to punishing for actual harm. I think another example of this is the COVID lockdowns, where if I were to leave my house during the COVID lockdowns, was I going to infect another person? Possibly. We don't know that. It's entirely possible I could not infect anybody, but the idea was that we wanted to reduce that harm. Now, I don't want to give the impression it's a slippery slope, and I do think there are cases where it is a valid argument of legislating something to reduce the potential for harm. I think an excellent example of this is legislating drunk driving, that I think a lot of people would agree. If you are driving drunk, it is selfish, it is irresponsible, and there is a significantly increased potential for you to hurt other people. But I think the larger idea is just that harm is a subjective term. It is one value. There are more values that we are looking to uphold as a society. And to reduce just like our morality and guiding principles down to something as simple as you can do whatever you want as long as you're not hurting other people is just too overly simplistic. I think we need to be thinking a little harder than that.